The goddess of isekai, with a far more calm and measured stride in her step, paced across the soft emerald grass. She mumbled to herself.
Eliminating the worst, trashiest, fanservious, cheapest isekai ever made wasn't enough? Not the slightest thing has changed. Destroying the Master of Ragnarok should've...
The bullshit hero, ever observant, and also because she wasn't really that far away from him, chimed in. Master of what? Say, is that an isekai I should go watch in the org thingy? With the speed of lightning, the goddess Sakuna closed the gap between herself and the hero. A gloved finger was placed over Mo's lips, delivering a shock of energy.
It's okay, there's no need to do any of that. Or indeed worry about anything related to a show that may or may not have been smited out of existence.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Chapter 6. Bullshit. But what about good isekai?
So here's a thought. What if we've been looking at this all wrong?
I mean, we're getting nowhere. So probably.
Just stop being pointlessly sassy for 2 seconds and listen. Ever since I dragged you here, and you started this essay, we've been trying to find the anime that ruined isekai by looking at bad anime, with the assumption that there must have been an anime so filled with problems yet so profitable that it poisoned my entire domain.
Mo nodded. Sure, right.
That's an unchallenged assumption. You know that more than me. What if a halfway decent anime with a ton of obvious flaws came first, and my domain of precious otherworld stories had been rotted trying to imitate those successes?
Of course. Then this hypothetical isekai, we'll call it I0.
Pretentious asshole.
I0 has flaws that became exaggerated and propagated over time as storytelling decisions that may have worked in context morphed into shallow tropes.
Exactly.
So then here's the question. Do we pick something that the weaves think is good, or something that's actually good? Sakuna frowned.
It's true the two are rarely in line.
And by rarely you mean never.
Let's go with what the weebs think is good.
She had a sense of optimism in her voice that Mo suddenly realized she never had before.
If this isekai story we're searching for was actually good, as in it did not feature many of the problematic tropes and repetitive storytelling decisions we've been complaining about, it could not have possibly contributed to the current state of utter disaster isekai finds itself in today. We want stories that indulge in a lot of the same problems, but in ways that many people can't help but enjoy and defend.
Sure, and if that's the case, a confident bullshit hero declared, I've got just the anime to break down.
As do I.
On 3.
1, 2,
Jobless
Jobless Reincarnation. I thought we were in sync.
Why the hell would you expect me to sully the largest, most complex, most painstaking piece of analysis I've ever done by dedicating an entire section on horny baby?
Jobless Reincarnation is a light novel series in anime that literally markets itself as the progenitor of all isekai. There are multiple think pieces out there claiming that your favorite isekai stole from Jobless Reincarnation, or that Jobless Reincarnation was one of the first shows to use common isekai tropes with purpose to tell a good story. It's the perfect parallel to starting this essay with Sword Art Online.
Mo scratched the back of his head. I guess?
You don't have a Jobless Reincarnation rant planned, do you?
It was either that or never finish this. Also, I didn't exactly know how this property existed before it got an anime last season. I'm only able to bring this show into the analysis at all because of how long I've had to delay this latest draft.
Draft? Whatever do you mean?
Mo felt the cold grip of return by draft wrap around his lungs. Nothing.
Whatever, just spare a few words on it, bullshit hero. Somehow, I'm convinced it will come most in handy for your conclusion.
Ozoreru nara yama wo koete yuke mishitari nu kokoro ni. Jobless Reincarnation tells the story of a 34-year-old Japanese NEET and otaku who we first meet getting evicted from his apartment, Houseless and coming to the realization that this man has never done anything meaningful in his entire life, he dies being hit by a truck trying to save a bunch of teenage girls. Instead of dying, of course, he's reincarnated to another world, a world in which everyone and everything looks incredibly like medieval Europe. The man is reincarnated as an infant baby, but he's a special infant baby in that he still has the mind of a 34-year-old man who played one too many hentai visual novels instead of speaking to real people. So anyway, he starts ogling his mom, who the story is quick to point out looks European, meaning she's more attractive or something. Immediately after, he goes on a tangent about how he can't wait to suck on his isekai mom's fat mommy milkers, and that the only downside is that he doesn't get turned on account of being in a baby's body, or because it's his mom. Who knows? And immediately after, he harasses a different woman. Same episode, mind you. The first one. And it turns out, this is all he does. Like, the whole show is just this fucker, Rudy. Rudy's his name, not that it matters. He just harasses women. And I'll be real, because I always am. Most of the women he harasses are children. We get several time skips in the story, so the dude has the mind of a 40-year-old and he's sexually harassing children on screen. There are panty shots of kids, scenes of a child masturbating for the first time or one of the first times. Long, uncomfortable segments in which you can hear people have sex in the background for no reason whatsoever. Oh yeah, and also our protagonist tries to rape a child on screen. So, watching Jobless Reincarnation re-traumatizes victims of sexual abuse. I'm not just saying that. I've spoken to people for whom the show was an actual mental health risk. And it's not because the show is touching on dark themes like all the fucking rubes on AniTube seem to think it is. It does so because it shows abuse again and again, often for fan service, from the perspective of an abuser and no one else, with all the rationalizations that abusers make for themselves, and then demands you have sympathy for him anyway, because he's a good guy at heart and he's getting better. The defenders of Jobless Reincarnation, which, in any just world, would not exist, have three main arguments to justify what the show is doing. 1. Jobless Reincarnation is about Rudy becoming a better person, as such he needs to start out as a bad person in order to get better down the line. 2. Rudy having flaws makes the story realistic and not a toxic power fantasy like other isekai. 3. Rudy gets punished when he mistreats people, making Jobless Reincarnation a story that holds its abuser accountable. Some may even say it's progressive compared to other anime. So for one, I'll just dismiss it out of hand. So you're telling me that the appeal of Jobless Reincarnation is that I have to sit through uncomfortable pedophilic harassment scene after uncomfortable pedophilic harassment scene, and then, after 200 chapters of the fucking light novel, at the end, he's like 30% more capable of treating women like human beings? That's supposed to get me narratively invested. Are you shitting me? No, that's just bullshit. What's interesting about seeing this happen? That's just a bad story. You realize nothing worthwhile is happening in the meantime, right? I'll combine 2 and 3 into a single point. So, after Rudy attempts to rape someone, it's a girl named Eris. She kicks the shit out of him. And this is something that fans point to when they say that Jobless is holding Rudy accountable for his decisions. This is a really easy trap to fall into, so I don't necessarily blame people for thinking it's reasonable. However, I do blame certain AniTubers, and by certain I mean Mother's Basement, for legitimizing it because they're lazy hacks who refuse to use their goddamn brains for 2 seconds to do any kind of literary analysis. Let's look at what happens. Not immediately after he tries to rape a chick or he gets beat up, but just literally 5 seconds later. Oh, what's that? She forgives him immediately? It's almost as if there are no real lasting consequences for Rudy's behavior, because there aren't, obviously. So for the child brain Mushoku Tensei stands out there, let me break it down real nice and simple, okay? Mushoku Tensei is a male power fantasy. It's a power fantasy for abusers. So in the real world, if a 40-something-year-old man tried to have sex with a child like Eris, there would be long-lasting social consequences. We know that abusers don't often actually get tried or sentenced. However, there are still social consequences. The victim will grow to hate the abuser, maybe she'll tell her family and friends, and people will avoid the abuser after learning he is dangerous to be around. The person who was attacked will probably never ever ever forgive their attacker, nor should they be expected to. So Mushoku Tensei takes this person and moves them to a fantasy world where they can leer and ogle and touch and sometimes even attack people and still be forgiven. A fantasy world where you can try and rape a girl, and the worst you get out of it is being kicked for a second before she literally starts falling in love with you. A fantasy world of plausible deniability. Of, well, she was kinda asking for it anyway, and, well, the nobles wanted me to have sex with her, and, well, technically I'm a kid too. The world of Jobless Reincarnation is a world where fail-son abusive men are given incredible amounts of power. They're allowed to fail again and again and again and again and again and again and again with only minor short-term consequences, so you can't say they'd let you get away with it. It's a world that understands that you feel like you were bullied at some point, and that's why you're so messed up, and will gladly let you hurt as many people as it takes to somewhat become a functioning member of society. Oh, and of course there are always way worse people who rape even worse than you around the corner to make you look better by comparison. That's what this story is. It's in the title. I will seriously try if I go to another world. As long as he tries somewhat, he gets everything. Of course, this isn't how the real world works. The real world isn't a testing ground for your bullshit. If you hurt people, they may not forgive you. You may live with that for the rest of your life. It's not trying somewhat, it's a dedication to restorative justice. And you need to address your harm now while facing long-lasting social consequences, not after 200 light novel chapters. If it seems like I'm being mean to Jobless Reincarnation and its fans, it's because, again, it's hurt people. If you like Jobless Reincarnation, you like something that causes harm, and for very little positive traits in return. I haven't seen the anime adaptation of Jobless Reincarnation in its entirety. And I haven't even read the books. I haven't taken notes like I have for every other anime in this essay. At some point in time, I will go back and give it an honest look, but my core opinion on this story will not change. I promise you that. Jobless Reincarnation is one of the worst things I've had the displeasure of knowing exists.
If it were true that all modern isekai was derived from this one Naruto light novel, it would perfectly explain much of what's wrong with my domain.
Yeah, but it's not true. At least SAO's web novel started in 2002. It got an anime adaptation before or as most of these shows were even ideas in the original author's heads. Hell, Jobless Reincarnation started publishing after ReZero did in 2012. By then, the isekai trend had been well underway in the online light novel sphere.
That progenitor of all isekai stuff is just a capitalist marketing gimmick?
Seems like it's me. And a way for light novel fans to feel good about themselves. Sakura put a hand on the hero's shoulder. He flinched, expecting to be zapped by her electrifying powers. But nothing of the sort took place. She had an incredibly firm grip, radiating with power, but he was fine.
Let's talk about ReZero then.
Jibun no gaku ni toraware mayate so janai yo to iie kikasete subete wo jiyu ni ayatsureru ka nante wakaranai yo to sora wakasunde sekai wa doko. ReZero is an isekai starring Natsuki Subaru, a 17-year-old otaku NEET who has given up going to school or doing anything with his life beyond reading manga and playing video games. One night, after picking up junk food at a convenience store, he closes his eyes and opens them to find he's been reincarnated into a fantasy world. There, he meets a beautiful elf girl named Amelia and, in order to try and impress her, rather quickly falls into a world of murder, death, religious cults, aristocracy, and political intrigue. Subaru discovers that, instead of some innate affinity to magic or a claim to the throne like in some other isekai, the being that summoned him gave him the curious power to respawn after death to a save point, like in a video game. He calls his power Return by Death, and everyone just goes with that. The being that granted Subaru his powers threatens to either kill him or everyone around him if he ever tries to explain it to anyone. This is very important. It'll come up a few times as we talk about ReZero. It's not like a secret that I don't like this show. Actually, it was supposed to be somewhat of a secret, back when I was planning to release this essay more or less all at once and not over the span of 2 years. But then I went on Twitter, I got into a few fights, pumped out a few Twitter reviews, there was a dubiously canon bullshit no Yuusha side story that got written, and now everyone knows that I just don't like ReZero very much. I'm well known among ReZero Twitter as guy who does not like ReZero, among other less polite things probably. Oh well. The bartender asks, why the long face? But there's something liberating about establishing that ReZero is a show I really don't like, in that I think I can focus less on establishing the reasons why ReZero doesn't tickle my fancy and more on the actual analysis that could be interesting or useful to listen to. When ReZero first aired in 2016, and when I started watching it in 2019, the reviews were positive but mixed. It was a really popular show at the time, with a dedicated fan base of the books and visual novels already. I'm not saying people used to hate ReZero as much as I fucking do, but there was room for dislike in the discourse. Reddit threads I was able to dig up from this era describe people not being totally satisfied with the show towards the end of the first season, not really liking how a lot of the characters outside of Subaru rarely got developed. In general, many thought the time loop death stuff was done better in Steins Gate, an opinion I endorse with my entire chest, by the way. When I first drafted this essay, I wasn't even that anti-ReZero. Between episodes 4 and 11 of the first season, I really fell in love with it. And even though I ended up not liking the rest of the first season, I originally meant to argue that ReZero, while not bad, isn't as unique or as different as people say, and as I'd hoped, to be frank. But somewhere along the way, in the lead up to release of the second season in summer 2020, this room for dissension disappeared. Mother's Basement, the gift that keeps on giving in this essay, released a video in January 2020 titled ReZero's a Masterpiece, Fuck You, Fight Me, in which he rather incoherently rants about how perfect and amazing ReZero is for like 40 minutes. As people built hype for Season 2, a cottage industry seemed to form of mid-sized personalities on Twitter and YouTube generating clicks by harassing people who don't like ReZero. By the time the show came out, saying you didn't like ReZero was more or less heresy. I know because I was literally harassed by ReZero fans for saying such a thing. People argued with me about the show for days, following me around anytime I posted about the show, even rejoicing when I said I was done talking about it for a while. Anyway, let's get back to describing the show for a bit longer. Subaru learns of his newfound power in the show's first arc, where he meets, aside from Amelia's spirit guide cat, Puck, an impoverished orphan named Felt, her caretaker Rom, and a knight of this setting's main country, Lagunica, named Reinhardt. The story then has Subaru move into Amelia's royal mansion. She's a princess, I'll get into that later. Where he meets twin demon maids Rem and Ram, the lord of a particularly notable domain of Lagunica, Roswell Mathers, and a bunch of kids from the village. The anime starts with a couple of whodunit mysteries where the murder victim and the detective are the same person, Subaru. These early stories focus particularly on Subaru getting Rem, Ram, and Amelia to trust him before they transition into what will become the meat of the story for the next 3 cores of the show: the royal selection process for the next ruler Lagunica, and investigating the origins of Return by Death. The goddess friend.
Wait, you're telling me the show has characters named Rem, Ram, and Rom?
Yeah, replied the hero.
And that doesn't get confusing for you humans.
Surprisingly the least of my concerns, but basically.
Doesn't that break, like, every storytelling rule?
Well, ReZero is all about subverting expectations, or at least they say. Wait, was that you queuing up the next segment? She folded her arms.
I mean, I thought you...
But I thought you...
You were the one who...
But you...
No, but it was you. No,
but you...
That went on for quite a while. But have no fear, dear listener. I, the one true goddess of alternate dimensions, have once again assumed control of the narrative. Why don't you and I have a bit of a conversation on subverting expectations? ReZero really wants you to know that it's subverting your expectations of how you think an isekai is going to go. The hardcore ReZero stans who Mo pointlessly wastes his time arguing with will assert on God that ReZero has practically reinvented my domain. But this isn't necessarily the fault of said fans. The show wants you to think of it this way, and does not attempt to hide that fact. Before you get even 10 minutes into the first episode, which is 45 minutes long, by the way, ReZero has done everything it can to convince you that it's not like those other lame isekai for babies. Subaru tries to unlock his cool magic powers to save a girl in need, only to realize that he doesn't have those powers. Subaru can't read the language of this world, instead of things auto-translating to Japanese like a video game. Subaru gets screamed out of a bathhouse and kicked out of a restaurant because of the cultural norms in this world that are different than those of Japan. Subaru doesn't have a status bar or EXP or a skill tree that he can use for combat. Subaru expects the world to be set up in such a way that he is strong, but this is not the case, at least at first glance. Subaru expects Emilia to be the height of her society, but elves are actually oppressed here. Subaru expects to be summoned by a hot girl who's in love with him, but she's nowhere to be found, for now, and very mean as far as we know. Emilia isn't just some nice girl who likes Subaru, or so she says. She's actually a very transactional person and doesn't care much for Subaru personally, as far as we know. Later in the episode, Subaru expects the world to follow Dragon Quest JRPG logic by placing him on the easternmost part of the world map. But Lagunica is actually the westernmost country. I have to stress, none of these are observations the viewer is expected to notice naturally as the story progresses. The dialogue stops, most of the time in extremely awkward ways, to make sure you notice how different ReZero is going to be from what you're expecting. There are a few problems with this. First, it's really obnoxious. The writing is patting itself on the back instead of actually delivering anything interesting. Switching up a few of the more obvious cliches can be nice, but refreshing storytelling requires fundamental structural change to the writing. For example, I really don't care what continent Subaru starts on, or even if he has a status bar or not. Those aren't the essence of what is wrong at the heart of isekai. Third, and I cannot stress this enough, a ton of these end up being not true at all, which makes this goddess wonder why bring so much attention to them in the first place. For example, take Emilia. Her transactional, standoffish nature isn't a real character trait she has for more than the first few episodes. She's just a tsundere talking a big game in front of Subaru. Her actual personality is just the same generic nice girl personality that male writers give to every female anime lead in existence. She doesn't fall in love with Subaru early on, but they are the romantic pair of the show by episode 4 or so. And Subaru's media literacy, making him think elves are beautiful and high class, actually helps him in the long run. Or what about Subaru himself? We'll get to this later, but even though he does not have flashy superpowers, Return by Death is extremely overpowered as an ability. It's true that Subaru has to die, usually painfully, for it to work, but the benefits clearly outweigh the cost. The space-time continuum itself does not move forward unless Subaru is ready to move forward with it. The show asserts that Subaru is a small, helpless, insignificant little speck in this world, before giving him a power that makes the show's entire universe revolve around him. When Mo speaks to ReZero fans, this point seems to be a hard sell, because fans are usually focused on how much trauma Subaru receives as a consequence for using Return by Death. If you give us a second, you'll see why this point doesn't matter at all. Still, consider this. There are many people who Subaru decides he cannot allow to die. People who are close to him, like Rem, Emilia, Ram, etc. There are also people who die over the course of the story that Subaru does not bother saving. A good example of this would be, like, some of the unnamed soldiers over the course of the big fight in the back half of Season 1. So, in this world, if you know Subaru, you're more likely to end up in a timeline where you live, because Subaru cares about you. And if you do not know Subaru, or worse, if you're on his bad side, you're more likely to end up in a timeline where you're dead. So Subaru is thus the most important character in the show. The character dynamics here are actually very similar to the 8th Son or something. But the responsibility for these choices has been shifted away from Subaru and towards the entity that gave him Return by Death. That entity, by the way, turns out to be a goddess that really is genuinely in love with him. She just expresses that love that always isn't harmful at first. So, what's the point here? What are we subverting?
By now I think we've at least narrowed down one big reason ReZero frustrates the ever-loving shit out of me. It's not as different as it wants to be. I think I almost dislike ReZero more than the samey bullshit isekai we get every season, because at least those shows don't pretend to be something they are not. ReZero absolutely does. It's not actually subversive where it matters. We'll be back on this idea. But for now, more things I don't like about ReZero. ReZero is really confusing. It's legitimately hard to understand. This essay has been hard for me to finish. If you follow me on Twitter or just notice that it's been more than a year since I published Bullshit no Yuusha Volume 2, you'd know. I've had to rewatch anime that I didn't remember well to write about them. I had to rewatch a few episodes of This Mate Null and a few episodes of The Eighth Sun just to finish the draft. But ReZero stands head and shoulders above every other isekai I've written about so far, in the sense that I've had to rewatch the entire thing every time I've wanted to write about it. I'll be like posting on Twitter about something in Season 2, and I'll just be unable to really talk about it because I need to rewatch Season 1 for a 6th time to really understand what the fuck is happening and who these people are. ReZero fans will tell you that this is a feature, not a bug. That the lore is just so intricate, ReZero necessitates multiple viewings to get the full experience. That your feeble mind is just too primitive and unsophisticated to fully grasp the genius that Nagatsuki Tappe is spinning from his loom pure language. But no, it's because it's bad. It's poorly written, so it's confusing and also bad. ReZero is organized in a way that I've taken to calling punchline first storytelling. ReZero will often set up mysteries by introducing things out of context that the viewer has no hope of understanding. The assumption, I think, is that the viewer gets curious, seeing something they don't understand, and will want that confusion resolved later. Then, later, sometimes a full 50 episodes later, when you've long forgotten about the setup, it'll dump the context on you and expect you to be surprised or shocked or invested. But it just makes you go, wait, what was that again? A horse walks into a bar. Do you get it? Isn't that funny? What do you mean you're confused? Around 2,000 words ago, which is about 10 minutes ago if my math is right, I mentioned that a bartender asked, why the long face? It was probably really confusing because it came out of nowhere. You didn't know of a bar or the bartender. You might have thought it was a typo. Then I proceeded to talk about a bunch of other stuff. Then me and Sakana got into a gag fight, we exchanged the narrative amongst ourselves, and now I'm suddenly out of nowhere giving you the context for that confusing line. A horse walks into a bar. That's why the bartender asked why the long face, because horses have long faces. It's a joke. Yeah, it doesn't really land, does it? You probably would have preferred the version of the joke that people actually tell. A horse walks into a bar. The bartender asks, why the long face? That's what I mean when I say ReZero's punchline first. ReZero tells all of its stories this way, or enough that the entire experience is overly complicated and headache-inducing. And because I'm, in part, an anime critic, if I make a mistake because of the inherently confusing story structure of ReZero, people will literally harass me on Twitter for days on end, stalking my posts about ReZero, talking about some, you can't follow basic storytelling structure, how dare you criticize things, blah 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 blah. So if I don't want to get harassed on Twitter, I have to rewatch ReZero again, and the more I watch it, the more convoluted it gets, and the more pissed off I get, and the feedback loop turns a story that I originally thought was kinda flawed into one of my least favorite pieces of media. Here are two examples that stick out to me as just being especially terrible. Like I mentioned, at the beginning of the story we meet Felt, a scrappy, impoverished orphan caught on the wrong end of Lagunica's class system, and her caretaker, Rom. She steals Amelia's insignia. The latter says it's really important to her and leaves it at that. Then, after a tough fight with a busty, stabby woman named Elsa, the insignia reacts with Felt, and she's arrested on site. Partway through, Subaru obtains the insignia and declares he's going to give it back to its original owner. This gets him stabbed to death, for what we think is no reason. A few episodes later, we learn the insignia is actually what qualifies Amelia to be a candidate in Lagunica's highly convoluted election process.
As you wish. There's a specific reason we've gathered you who are qualified to be the Dragon's priestess. A new prophecy has been engraved in the Dragonstone. This new insight says, from the 5 capable of becoming the nation's new leader, choose one priestess to enter into a covenant with the dragon.
So, if she lost it, people will think someone who can't even keep her insignia safe can't run a country. You know, fair. So this piece of information gives us 2 things. 1, Felt, despite being a commoner in every way and extremely poor, somehow qualifies to be queen along with very wealthy and well-connected nobles. 2, the reason why Subaru was stabbed was because Busty Stabby Woman was probably hired to disqualify Amelia from the royal selection by a political opponent, thus showing us the lengths candidates will go to win. This information is sorta useful and interesting, but because it's told to you in a block of text by Amelia and Roswell and not incorporated into the current events of the story, you have no time to breathe and realize this is what's happened. I got this after my 3rd viewing of ReZero's first season. Second, and here's the important part, even if you realize the implication of Amelia's insignia right away, that information was way more useful 5 seconds ago during the action. Had we been tipped off beforehand that an election was taking place and that insignia qualifies you to run in it, Elsa would have immediately become a more fleshed out character. She's not just stabbing people because she likes guts. Now she has a political alignment. Maybe her interests are diametrically opposed to people like Felt, who languish in poverty. Also, Felt qualifying for the royal selection is equally impactful. She dreams of escaping poverty and rising to the top. We know, as soon as the insignia reacted with her, that her wish was coming true. Her violent arrest would tell us that it won't necessarily be like she thinks. The story is actively worse by moving the information you need to care about these characters to after they're both already gone. Felt doesn't show up again until episode 13. Elsa doesn't even show up again until the middle of season 2. Actually, let's talk about Elsa, shall we? Because that's my second example. Season 2 of ReZero is largely a backstory season because we've introduced 500 fucking characters at this point and absolutely zero context for any of them. There's even a backstory plot device called the Witch's Trial that gives us the backstory for all the characters at once, as is typical of ReZero. We get Elsa's backstory in Season 2 Part 2. She grew up in a country north of Lagunica. Despite what her clothing suggests, she actually grew up poor and physically, maybe sexually abused. She kills one of her attackers to save her own life, and that trauma turns her into a highly skilled assassin.
The land to the north where I was born was a very cold and desolate place. I was abandoned as a child. I hurt people and stole from them day after day. I had no time to think about things like truly living or happiness. Once, during a blizzard, I was stealing from a shop and its owner captured me.
Hey, shut up! Nobody cares!
Obsessed with disemboweling people with her knife. You wanna know what happens after we learn this? Elsa fucking dies! She leaves the story forever. We spend 2 full seasons not understanding a single thing this character has ever done, then she dies. Imagine if we knew about her, maybe not right away, but early on. Maybe she and Felt could have interacted, compare and contrast their starting circumstances and life choices. At the very least, we'd understand why she was so hell-bent on doing jobs that let her cut people's stomachs open. But no, it's just nothing, and then she's gone. Why? Why is ReZero written like this? It's actually really easy to understand. ReZero was a web novel, posted on Naro, if you can believe that. It was written in the same way Homestuck was, or any other Western webcomic from the 2000s. It was written in the same way this essay was written. The author, Nagatsuki Tape, probably had some idea of where he wanted the story to go generally, but there was probably a lot of unexpected twists and turns as the chapter started coming out. Foreshadowing and callbacks are an easy way to keep engagement in a serialized story. What probably happened is that Nagatsuki introduced something like Elsa or Felt, and went, I'll fill that in later. And later he does. It maybe wasn't so bad reading the chapters as they were published serially, but it's atrocious putting it all together. Besides, this just isn't how you do foreshadowing. Foreshadowing isn't about introducing something, letting it linger in the air like a bad fart not making sense, and then explaining it later. Foreshadowing is about giving the context, usually partial context for something, and then giving more information later that recontextualizes what you thought you knew.
The show's general lack of stakes becomes a problem as the story progresses. Return by Death is such a story-breaking plot mechanic that it's written out of the story by season 2 for not really compelling reasons.
Right. There are two problems with Return by Death, Mo began. The first is that most of the times Subaru returns by death, he has no choice in the matter. He tries his best and gets killed, and gets revived to his last spawn point against his will to live it out all over again.
What are you doing, you buffoon? Do you want to die or something?
Of course not, don't be dumb. That isn't what I want at all. I only want to die once, at the end of a long and happy life. That's how I really feel.
The second is that Return by Death isn't actually limited. There's a hypothetical limit on Return by Death. It will only work as long as the goddess who gave him the power loves him. But, as you said, the Witch of Envy is madly in love with Subaru, so that's not going to happen.
I love you. 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 I love you.
The story really struggles with how to fix this. The show's main excuse for Subaru not abusing Return by Death is that in alternate dimensions that we're told could maybe possibly exist, alternate versions of the characters that we don't know have to live with the fact that Subaru died, which adds approximately 0 stakes whatsoever.
Again, Subaru didn't choose to leave those versions of the characters behind most of the time. When he did, you're asking me as a viewer to weigh the happiness of characters I've seen and I've been following since the beginning with the sorrow of unofficial Doom timeline versions of the same characters I will never see again. The choice is really obvious. You know what's funny though? Basically every time travel story runs into this question of stakes. Okay, so spoilers I guess, but the last episode of Phineas and fucking Ferb is a time travel special, where the titular boy's older sister, Candace, uses a time machine over and over to try and get her brothers in trouble. The days repeat against her will, much like in ReZero, but the writers caution against using this power by making it dangerous to the fabric of reality.
You know you could have picked Steins Gate for that example, right?
Sakuna asked with an eyebrow cocked.
The time travel in that show was limited by the fact that some negative events are incredibly difficult to change. Furthermore, some timeline changes that seem to improve things for the main characters doomed the rest of the world to suffering, so the power has stakes if abused.
Mo grinned. Yeah, but I like being able to say that a children's show is more competently written than ReZero. It's fun.
And true.
Wow, we are on a roll. See what happens when you don't electrocute me or make the sky all swirly?
Don't push your luck, bullshit hero.
So that more or less covers the wait, you don't like this incredibly popular anime? Why not discussion of things. But I think it's high time we started the quintessentially Mo Black section of the essay, as in, how does ReZero treat social issues and ideology? Best place to start are the show's female characters, and how they're all either fucking terrible or don't show up nearly enough. Amelia doesn't make decisions on her own. She is literally one of the most powerful characters on screen at any given moment, and her existence is men making decisions for her. I'll define what I mean by making decisions versus men making decisions for her in a quick second, but I need to stop and clarify something. I already hear the ReZero fans being like, no, Mo, that's actually her character arc. If you actually watched the show and waited, you'd realize that she grows into making decisions. That's the point of the story. And this is true, in a sense. In the second season, the story begins to recognize that Amelia, despite on paper being a powerful magician and influential politician, is in practice a pretty fucking virgin waifu doll. Season 2 gives her a much needed backstory, too late for it to inform her actions and all at once in ReZero's classic punchline first style. And she does indeed end up making decisions. She saves people, she helps beat the bad guy, she knows things. She's an activation in the plot for the last 5 seconds there. It's a wonderful time. But what you're telling me is that I just sat through 2 full seasons of anime to watch this one character make one decision. This is not the gacha you think it is. It's actually just embarrassing. Let me put 2 seasons worth of anime in perspective for you, because I lost my entire spring break rewatching the show and note-taking just for this, okay? ReZero's first season is 25 episodes, but it's 26 episodes long because the first episode is a double feature. Season 2 Part 1, Season 2 had to be split due to COVID-19, is 13, and Season 2 Part 2 is another 13. Except, while in Season 1 had standard anime lengths, like 25 minutes per episode, Season 2 Part 1 is actually 27 minutes per episode, and Season 2 Part 2 is a half hour per episode. So all in all, that's over 23 hours of anime. It shouldn't take 23 hours of confusing bullshit storytelling to arrive at what should be the baseline for female leads. So what do I mean when I say Emilia doesn't make decisions? Of course Emilia has to make decisions in general here and there. Presumably she decides what she wants to wear when she wakes up, and what she wants to eat, and so on. In one episode she makes a decision to help Subaru. But when I talk about decisions, I'm talking about choices Emilia makes that fundamentally change the direction of the story. The decisions I'm interested in are decisions that make other characters respond to Emilia, and not Emilia respond to other characters. We can call them, I guess, narratively significant decisions, or like NSDs to avoid confusion. For example, why does Emilia decide she wants to rule Lagunica? She doesn't? Her entire family has been frozen in an ice forest for hundreds of years, long story, and Roswaal says she'll help her if she becomes queen. I guess she's deciding to save her family by listening to what Roswaal has to say, sure. I realize this is actually a subtle point, so I need to step back for a bit. All decisions, from banal decisions to NSDs, need context. If you decide to use your lunch break to grab a burger from Five Guys, there is a good deal of information helping you make that decision. Maybe you're especially hungry today, and you've got the money to spend for a pricier burger. Maybe someone you've been flirting with is a cashier today, and you hope to see them. Maybe you're almost done with your project, and it won't matter if your lunch break goes overtime. Someone, without all this context, wouldn't have the agency to make that decision. They'd be blindly guessing if Five Guys was the right move today or not. One good rule of thumb for figuring out if a character can make NSDs is if they have access to all the relevant information necessary to change the plot. So if a character is put in charge of something, but the information that they get is limited or manipulated in some way, they're not actually making a decision, or at least they're not making an NSD. No, not every character needs to know everything all of the time. We can imagine a story where a group of rebels is planning to overthrow a queen, and the queen has no idea. She continues to rule as if she faces no serious political opposition. The queen doesn't have any agency here because there are major plot events happening that she can't react to or plot against. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, and not all characters need to have agency at all times. But imagine if there was a character that always had this dynamic happening. Such a character would be consistently out of the loop, and so would never have agency. That's Emilia. I'm sorry I need to be really specific because I know how ReZero fans get, and I'm trying to be crystal clear with what I observe and how it makes me feel. In the back half of Season 1, an evil religious group known as the Witches Cult is after Emilia because she looks like, more on this later, but she looks like the Witch of Envy. They slaughter Emilia, the entire Roswaal domain, and every man, woman, and child in the village. Because Emilia died, Puck is contractually obligated to end all life on Earth, also a long story. But Emilia doesn't get to know about the Witches Cult, not at first. She doesn't have the agency to stop it. Only Subaru knows, and he and Emilia are not talking, we'll get to that. Subaru makes all of the NSDs necessary to defeat the Witches Cult. Emilia just gets moved around for that entire arc. And when she does get to know about the Witches Cult, it's only what she needs to know to execute her small part in Subaru's plan. So about the whole looks like thing, I was gonna make a note about how I feel like the anime implies Emilia and Satella, who's the Witch of Envy, are the same person through timey-wimey bullshit, but that I did want to read the light novels and confirm. But I checked the wiki, and it's apparently not known to this day whether or not they're the same person, which, you know, why? Why not? What's going on there? Come on. Or, let's take the main conflict of Season 2. Emilia doing the witch's trial. Witch agreed this time, not Envy. Emilia has to do the witch's trial, and it's very hard for her because she has a sad backstory. Subaru goes back and forth on whether or not he'll let her do a thing, or if he'll do it for her, for a very long time. Emilia ends up caught up in a very dangerous competition between Subaru and Roswaal. Roswaal wants to force Emilia to undergo the trial because if she does, the people of the village will love her and her stance in the royal selection will go up. If he fails, he knows Subaru can just return by death to do it over. Roswaal also emotionally isolates Emilia to the point of insanity, so that she's taken over by the Witch of Envy if Subaru fails to take care of her, and also summons a hive mind of flesh-eating magic rabbits for Subaru to defeat as well. Roswaal also orders Elsa and some child from Season 1 to the mansion to kill everyone, including Rem, who's been erased from existence, for Subaru to stop as well. It's a lot. Don't mind the details. Focus! Okay, meanwhile, Subaru needs to get Emilia to succeed in the trial so that he could do other important hero things and save the day from all that bullshit, and also bullshit with Return by Death. He keeps getting summoned by the Witch of Greed, and she's making her drink bodily fluids that I'm pretty sure are just pussy juice. Okay, focus, damn it. Emilia is not aware that any of this is happening. She's not aware of Return by Death. She's not aware of this game Roswaal is playing. She's not aware she's being fucked with. And the story basically openly admits that Subaru and Roswaal are both trying to force their will on her, but Subaru's will is to make Emilia strong and self-confident, so it's okay, I guess. I will again acknowledge, yes, Emilia does get actively involved by the end of this arc. She passes the trial, she saves the villagers, she helps beat the rabbit with Subaru on equal footing instead of being a pawn in his plan. It's genuinely nice. I'm glad I actually have something positive to say here. In earlier attempts to finish this essay, I would have had nothing. But again, over 23 hours of anime, just to watch her make one decision, it's not worth it. Roswaal figuring out Return by Death by putting 2 and 2 together, but not Emilia, is especially frustrating. I think about how much better the show would be if Emilia was an actual political actor who has the savviness to figure out Subaru's secret and offer to work with him, both because she likes him and perhaps because she's looking out for her own interests as well. Furthermore, it'll always just be way more interesting to see Emilia do things, rather than have an arc where she learns she's allowed to do things. What I just described, way more interesting than what we got.
In other words, we return to the idea of subverting expectations. ReZero talks a lot about subverting expectations. It pats itself on the back for having an arc where its female lead is allowed greater importance than in most isekai. But why spend a season's worth of writing talking about subverting tropes when you can just do it?
Because it doesn't actually subvert as many tropes as people think?
I think it's about time I took the narrative from you again.
What? I didn't even do anything this time.
Because you're boring, and you're not even following your outline at this point.
Wait, how do you even know what my...
Season 1, Episode 13. Most who end up not enjoying ReZero come around to talking about this episode sooner or later. Because it is a lot. Truly, I will not pretend my investigation is above exploring this particular episode as well. If you'd like to see this episode analyzed through the context of being a female human anime fan, you may find this video essay by Noralities helpful. The ReZero stan cottage industry has really tried to do a number on her. In fact, if you search YouTube for this video, you will maybe find instead all the whiny hit pieces against her. It's funny to me, as I am a goddess whose material needs transcend all that you can imagine, but I would figure it would be sad to some of you at least, especially since her only crimes are being a woman and having correct opinions all of the time. Our analysis of this episode will hopefully be novel, but we will borrow a few observations from Noralities' work, which will be clearly labeled for the sake of transparency and academic honesty. My infinite knowledge as a goddess also tells me her work will come in handy for Season 1 Episode 18 as well, where Mo will make an important discovery. No need to tell him that yet though. Key to the question of if a character has agency is if the character is allowed to assert their boundaries. Oftentimes, female characters will not be allowed to, say, get angry at people who wrong them, I suppose out of a fear that this very basic and human thing would make the female character appear bitchy or unapproachable. Female characters will inexplicably never set boundaries with their male counterparts, or if they do, those boundaries will never be enforced. A good example of this would be from an anime outside of my personal domain and into the rom-com domain. Rent-a-Girlfriend's Chizuru, despite being a hot-headed tsundere on paper, isn't allowed to leave or otherwise dislike the main character for disrespecting her boundaries, even though these would be expected from women in real life. Season 1 episode 13 does offer some hope to the ReZero fan on this front. Subaru messes up with Emilia, he breaks his promises to her, puts her shot at winning the royal selection in danger, and disregards her multiple requests to be left alone. As such, Emilia decides she doesn't want to talk to Subaru anymore. It's one of the few scenes of its kind in isekai. One would think that this would be the recipe for a truly subversive isekai character dynamic. As it turns out, it's not actually enough for the story or Emilia to criticize Subaru. Subaru needs to be criticized for the correct things, and the show needs to offer a correct solution to the problem that he caused. Neither happened in this case. What does happen ends up bending the show back around into the same old. In the episode prior, Subaru catches wind that Emilia needs to go to the capital for matters concerning the royal selection. Subaru insists he go with her to help like he has until this point. In truth, he feels he must be with Emilia at all times, otherwise he won't be able to use Return by Death to save her from danger. Emilia, probably noticing how clueless Subaru has been so far when it comes to the social norms and political subtleties of Lagunica, decides against this. After all, Subaru didn't even know how to read her country's native language when they met. It would be easy to imagine him as a liability to her political goals. Subaru insists. Actually, begging is more accurate. Rem, who at this point has ceased to have a personality, points out that Subaru could use his time at the capital to meet up with people he has business with from earlier episodes and to heal from his last fight. After Roswell agrees, Emilia capitulates on the condition that Subaru do his business and not interfere with hers. Emilia holds his hand the entire time while walking him through his business because she does not trust him to not fuck something up. He acts petty and jealous the entire time, especially when she goes as far as to speak to other men, and the second Emilia has to leave him to do her own thing, he gets tangled up with one of her political rivals.
Super strong, fiery, independent woman. I was doing just fine on my own.
Something like that?
No.
At the end of the day, Emilia again asks Subaru to stay behind. Subaru is somehow surprised that he has to uphold his end of the deal he agreed to. He resolves that he's going to save Emilia without assessing whether or not the threat she even faces is something she can protect herself from, or if it even, exists. Subaru is in full-scale paranoia mode, motivated in part by trauma and in part by general male chauvinism. I mean, the dude literally says,
It's at the castle, although most likely there will be heavy security.
Security isn't the problem. I can't stand not being involved in Emilia's important affairs.
so he's really having a normal one here. And as such, he sneaks into the royal selection process with a different candidate for the royal selection around his arm. Emilia is clearly upset that he's there, with a political opponent no less, despite being told not to come at least 3 times by now. In episode 13, things only get worse. He embarrasses himself and Emilia defending her from elf racism. Another long story, it's bad. He calls the validity of the Royal Knights into question, but not in the all cops are bastards sort of way. Rather, I can fill your role better than all of you sort of way.
I hate the nobility! And I hate knights! And I hate this entire stupid kingdom!
His pointless combativeness gets himself challenged into a duel by one of the Royal Knights, at which point Emilia literally drags him out of the room so he can't ruin her career any further than he already has. The duel Subaru gets himself into? Subaru gets his ass beat so thoroughly and so one-sidedly he almost dies. He then screams at Emilia for not understanding how much he sacrificed to keep her safe, at which point Emilia tells him to never speak to her again. These 2 episodes really do have the potential to be a rather promising arc. Subaru ignores someone's boundaries, inserts himself into someone else's life uninvited, makes everything worse, and receives a negative consequence as a result. Subaru is wrong for, essentially, treating Amelia like a helpless puppy that can't take care of herself, for assuming he knows better than her and things she intimately understands, and for patently refusing to respect her boundaries. All that is needed from the story is for the narrative to line up with the actual events of the story. We need Amelia to express these same frustrations, to assert that her boundaries are her own and that she can take care of herself. In a well-written story, this would be a given. As you may have guessed, this is not what happens. I have omitted a few key facts from the events of episode 13 and its build-up in episode 12. Events that fans tend to ignore when talking about these episodes for reasons that will become clear in due time. Let's take this exchange from episode 12. It's after Subaru has made his rounds in the capital, and Amelia requests again that he stay away from the royal selection process.
This is the reason I can't take you with me. If I allow you to do so, you'll just push yourself too hard again. I don't want to let you do that. Understand?
I hear what you're saying, but you're the one who doesn't understand. If I have to push myself to help you, then I'll do it without a second thought. I've gotta at least try.
Absolutely not. Until your body fully heals, there is to be no using magic or pushing yourself. I want you to promise, okay? I'm asking you, Subaru. Give me a reason to trust you.
This exchange is strange to say the least. Amelia seems entirely uninterested in her own goals or even her own boundaries. She's concerned for Subaru. She casts his problem as him pushing himself too hard for her sake. In other words, she suggests that Subaru's flaw is that he just cares too much about Amelia and loves her too much, which kinda sounds like answering "I'm a perfectionist" when the job recruiter asks you for your biggest weakness. On the flip side, it also presents Subaru as someone who just wants to care about Amelia, and Amelia as the stubborn worrywart who won't let him. Basically, the entire conversation about if Amelia gets to be her own person and handle her own affairs is sidestepped. Everyone involved seems to agree that Subaru is expected to involve himself in every aspect of Amelia's life. He just needs to learn how to do that without getting himself hurt first. During the big argument between Subaru and Amelia, this idea comes up again. Amelia wants to believe that Subaru had a good reason for acting out the way he did, but grows frustrated with every new thing he says. Perhaps bringing the entire thing from the summoning seed would risk copyright, so I'll do my best.
Tell me, why did you end up, fighting with Julius? I mean, there must have been a reason, right? Knowing you, I'm sure it was very
I
important.
wanted to get him back for what he said. Huh? I was being stubborn. He said I was pathetic, powerless, and not worthy of you. He was trying to distance me from you, and I hated him for it.
Because when I'm with you, you always push yourself to do impossible things.
Wait, no, hold on. That's not what I'm saying. I just wanted...
You wanted what?
Let me finish. I just wanted to try and do something important for you.
Is that right? For me? But it was for you, wasn't it?
The conflict then becomes one of return by death. The argument is framed in such a way that, if Subaru could just tell Amelia about return by death, his actions would be justified.
Look, I'm sorry I didn't do as you asked. It was a mistake, but you're wrong about my reasons. You're wrong. Honestly, it wasn't for myself. Please believe me. I say that, but you won't believe me, will you?
I want to. I want to believe you, Subaru. Very much. But with every choice you make, you show me I have no reason to! Subaru, I still don't understand. Why do you keep trying to help me like this?
Because of the many times that you helped me.
Wait, I helped you?
Yes, that's right. You don't even realize how the things you've done for me have saved me.
I told you! I don't understand!
Maybe you don't. I totally get that, but please listen to me. Because it's the absolute truth. It was you. When I first came to this world, you were the one who saved me
It appears that once again you won't tell me anything.
If he could tell her about all the lifetimes he experienced where he fell in love with Amelia and where Amelia helped him when he was starting out, then his possessive, transgressive behavior would somehow become justified. But since he can't tell anyone about return by death, Amelia will never really understand. Emilia tells Subaru not to talk to her, if anything, for his sake. She thinks that if Subaru doesn't see her again, he won't get himself hurt for her sake, and doesn't like the guilt of Subaru sacrificing himself for her all the time. ReZero fans cite this episode as the episode where Subaru gets his just desserts. It's touted as the episode that forces incel types and otakus to own up to their clingy and possessive behavior, to own up to their flaws, if they ever want to meet a girl like Emilia who likes them. But that's not what's happening here. It doesn't criticize Subaru for not recognizing that Emilia can take care of herself. It doesn't criticize Subaru for crossing Emilia's boundaries to try and save her, regardless of if she needs it. It criticizes Subaru for not being good at it yet. This reading makes a lot more sense than the ReZero fan interpretation when we look at the rest of the show. Immediately after this arc, Subaru's worst fears are realized. The witches cult, who Mo mentioned earlier, is headed to the village to kill Emilia and all the townspeople. Emilia doesn't know about this and isn't strong enough to stop them. Nobody else cares enough about the witches cult or knows about their presence to stop them. Only Subaru has both the knowledge and the interest to save Emilia. At one point, Subaru even bargains away mining rights, economic resources, from the land Emilia rules without her knowing or being informed on screen. Wasn't she supposed to be a politician? A transactional, kind of stingy character that's careful with what she owes others? In other words, immediately after an arc that people say was supposed to teach Subaru not to be so possessive over Emilia, we have another arc where Subaru has to be possessive over Emilia. Immediately after the arc that is supposed to punish Subaru for disrespecting Emilia's boundaries, we have an arc where the correct thing for Subaru to do is to ignore her wishes, to stay away from her, to save her. Since Mo refused to compare ReZero to Steins Gate earlier, I think I will here. In Steins Gate's 5th episode, protagonist Okabe Rintaro and female lead Makise Kurisu play a nerdy strategy game a bit like chess. Kurisu is a high school genius with a college degree. Okabe is pretty smart himself, but he's just an amateur tinkerer playing mad scientist who's accidentally discovered the secret to time travel. In this episode, Kurisu beats Okabe at the game, in part because she's really smart, but also because Okabe tends to be short-sighted. In this moment, Okabe's image as an evil genius is shattered by this 18-year-old girl telling him that he's kind of a dummy. In response, Okabe loses it. He yells at Kurisu for no reason. He goes on about his mad scientist persona and a bunch of other made-up bullshit, and well, Kurisu just cries.
Are you crying down there?
What's there to cry about? Just because some maniac jumped out of his chair and started screaming at me about his damn fake name and scared me half to death? No, that's totally fine, no problem.
It turned out that before this moment, Kurisu had let slip that her father was verbally abusive to her. So yelling at her at all is a legitimate trigger, let alone yelling at her for some bullshit reason like being upset he lost a game. Okabe doesn't have the emotional intelligence to understand what he did wrong. A different character in the scene, Daru, points it out to him. And he has to sit there and feel bad about it. The show doesn't redirect to some other larger reason that justifies his behavior. The show doesn't go through the pains to point out how his own baggage means he's actually a good guy. Steins Gate just lets Okabe be the asshole with no easy way out of it. And if the viewer struggles with verbally assaulting people, they too are forced to feel like an asshole. Okabe apologizes, not by saying sorry exactly, which denies him the right to hear Kurisu tell him it's okay, but by calming down and trying to get to know her better. The two become a romantic couple, but only after they get over little moments like this. Now, this is a scene that is actually subversive. The thing that Okabe does wrong matches with what the text says Okabe did wrong. This is what actually holding your characters accountable looks like. It's not whatever ReZero tried to do. At the end of ReZero's first season, after he's gotten over his insecurity and learned to use his head instead of just his emotions to build allies and confront challenges, he and Emilia meet up again. Subaru does apologize for a lot of the worst parts of what he says in that Season 1 Episode 13 argument, which again, isn't bad, but it doesn't mean much unless he's apologizing for the right things, which he is not. Subaru admits he was devoting himself to saving Emilia for his own sake, but says he wants to learn how to devote himself to her for her sake because he loves her. In other words, he promises that the next time he obsesses over Emilia's personal life, he'll do it for her and not himself. how is this any different from any other male-female dynamic in any other story in the isekai realm? The girl is the one to be saved, the guy is the one who saves. There is nothing about this story that is special, transformative, or that speaks to incel otaku types in any way. It justifies all their feelings about the world. By making Return by Death something that Subaru has to keep for himself, it presents pain as something Subaru can't share with women in a way that's honest or vulnerable. It justifies the idea that he has to go it alone, making emotional sacrifices for others, even if no one asked him to make those sacrifices, and if making those sacrifices means treating other people like an object. It presents Subaru's interventionism and chauvinism, and thus the interventionism and chauvinism of any male dude bro audience, as a tool that needs perfecting, and not as a categorical negative.
Hey there, it's Mo. Back with the narrative once again. Can't say I'm not a little annoyed with how she keeps doing that, but that was a perfectly serviceable Season 1 Episode 13 discussion, and the best out of all the drafts I've lived and died through so far, so I won't complain too much. There are more things I don't like about ReZero.
Rem and Rem are introduced as the stereotypical sexy maid stereotype, but then it's revealed that Rem is trying to kill Subaru to protect her sister, which would actually be super cool and subversive if Rem didn't immediately fall in love with Subaru and devote her life to him while Rem fucked off from the story forever. When Rem comes back, it turns out she's in love with Roswell, which, yikes. Krush is a knight and another candidate to the Royal Selection who has her moments before admitting she low-key has a crush on Subaru, and then she loses her memories and leaves the narrative. The Royal Selection arc is some of the most garbage writing I've ever experienced. The actual episodes drag, the politics are shallow, and none of the candidates are interesting. This entire frame. Felt has promise of a working-class character when she declares she'll destroy the nobility of Lagunica and make it a country that works for people like her, but she disappears, never to be seen again. All the Witchers are named after the 7 deadly sins, but when Nagatsuki runs out of sins, he starts making up more, and I'm not sure how that makes me feel, to be quite honest.
And I could probably devote a whole section to that, but I'm way over time, so I want to focus on this one idea that's come up a few times, that ReZero isn't a show that its fans say it is. We're often told that ReZero is the story of Subaru, a flawed protagonist who needs to become a better person to accomplish his goals and earn Emilia's affection. In reality, ReZero is about someone who is already essentially a good person, who can do the right things, but lets baseless fear and self-criticism paralyze him from actually doing those things. I'm not actually sure why ReZero fans fight me on this point so hard. I mean, characters in the show will just say this.
There is only one way to pay for sins, and that is through pain. Ah, if you don't feel pain, that means you must not be a bad guy. You see yourself as a sinner, even though you're really not a bad guy at all, is that it?
ReZero being about Subaru realizing how great he's always been is the only way that a lot of the show makes sense. When Subaru goes through the backstory machine in Season 2, we learn that in his past life, Subaru gives up on going to school. Subaru doesn't need to fix some personality defect to resolve this. What happened was he got it in his head that he couldn't live up to the unreasonable expectations that he set for himself, and convinced himself that he'd be better off giving up. Or even episodes 12 and 13 from Season 1. It made no sense to introduce arcs that require Subaru to get more involved in Emilia's life if the point of the story was to have Subaru become a better person. But if the point of the story was to get him to realize that he can save Emilia after all, if he just applies himself and thinks before he speaks, everything makes perfect sense. In Season 2, Subaru confronts someone who we think is Rem at first. Rem tells him that he's worked very hard and he sacrificed a lot, so it's time for him to pass some of that burden onto her. Subaru protests that this is tantamount to asking him to give up, which makes no sense. Sharing emotional and physical responsibility is a healthy part of life, not giving up. But if the story is about how Subaru needs to learn to be this amazing hero, then it's perfectly natural to treat letting another character handle the heroics as giving up. It would be Subaru refusing to reach his destined potential. This is an entirely descriptive thing I'm trying to point out here. Not all stories need to be about becoming a better person. It's only when you combine this with the fact that ReZero seems unaware of the flaws Subaru does have, and the weird relationship ReZero has with most of his female characters, that it becomes an issue for me. And let's look at the relationship the show has with its female characters from yet another angle. See, ReZero has a core emotional loop. I believe it's this loop that makes the show so popular, though unlike the first thing, I do get why ReZero fans disagree with me on this one. The main loop goes as follows. So in the A part of the loop, Subaru undergoes a physical, emotional, and psychological torture. He is brought to his breaking point trying to play the hero. While other characters have their roles to play, this is a challenge that Subaru alone has the power to fix. In the B section, the repeated agony of return by death in Season 1 and in Season 2 Part 1, or confronting so many challenges at once, like in Season 2 Part 2, usually brings Subaru to a breaking point. He doesn't know if he can go on. He starts to believe that not only can he not accomplish anything, but that he's never accomplished anything in his entire life. C. A hot girl notices his suffering and confronts him. Her goal is not to help Subaru save the day. Sometimes she doesn't even understand what he's going through. Her role is to be a very curvy and warm body pillow that Subaru can cry on. And D. With his resolve replenished, Subaru lives to fight another day. He finally gets out of his own way and allows his natural heroism to take over. This time, he finally succeeds. I think ReZero fans fight me on this because it makes the show seem a little sexist and emotionally manipulative. Well, it is. So, okay, if you're raging at me right now, just be honest. Just go back and think. Really think. How many times has this cycle happened? Alright, here's one with Amelia.
Are you tired?
No, I'm totally fine, really.
Do you feel troubled?
If you're this nice to me, I'm gonna fall in love with you. When you... I mean, like that.
It's been rough, hasn't it?
And here's one with Rem.
Hey there, you must be tired after your practice.
Let me ask you something, Rem. Do you think I'm pathetic?
Yes, I do.
How about Echidna, the Witch of Greed?
Over and over! All alone! Alone this whole time!
I know.
Plus, the literal cinematic language of the first opening hammers in this structure. This happens so often that the actual text of the show points it out. If it seems like I'm being pedantic and irritable, it's because I have to be. Again, I've tried to have this conversation before, and people treat this reading as if it's heresy, when it is the reading most supported by the text, actually. Do you have any idea how hard it is to be right all the time? It's not as easy as people think. Arguably, one of ReZero's most important scenes can only really be understood within the context of the structure. If Season 1 Episode 13 is one scene everyone goes to when talking about why they don't like ReZero, the other one has to be Season 1 Episode 18. Neurality is this video again helped inform the analysis of this section, and if I borrow any observations directly from her video, it will be stated. After Subaru and Amelia's fight, he learns of the threat of the witches cult and goes to great lengths to stop them. He's too weak to fight them without an army, and he is humiliated and degraded trying to recruit help from other politicians vying for the throne. Why he doesn't ask Felt, who is strong, has powerful allies in knighthood, and already likes him by now, remains unknown. In this extended A section, Subaru experiences Rem being erased from history. Happens more often than you'd think. He freezes to death multiple times, he's physically tortured, decapitated, is forced to watch Rem being physically mutilated before carrying her mangled and dead body in his arms. He's forced to wade through pools of blood of slaughtered villagers, families, women, and children with no sense of how to stop it. I mean, at one point he even licks a foot. That'd be hard on anyone. The episode then transitions to a B section. He suggests to Rem that they give up everything in the capital, flee the country, have a bunch of babies together, and grow old. He reasons that all the suffering he's gone through is because he's just not good enough to figure through all these challenges. Each road he tries to explore will surely lead to disaster, so it would be better to cut his losses, move away with the pretty girl who likes him for some reason, and abandon any hope of becoming a fully realized hero. He complains about himself a lot. He mentions having no strength but wanting it all, having no knowledge but having dreams, about not being able to do anything but talking a big game. He describes himself as an empty shell who's wasted his life before he came to this world. He insists that until now, he hasn't really been doing anything but just putting in an effort here and there to prove to the others that he wasn't doing nothing. This last bit is a strange idea that I'll pick up again in just a second. This section runs from 4:30 in the episode to around 17 minutes 10 seconds. I presume it worked better in book form. It's a block of text and it's not super amazingly written, so half the episode is just him like whining and really hamming it up. Subaru ends the section with this.
Deep down inside, at the core of my heart, I'm just a small, cowardly, filthy piece of trash who's always worried about how they'll see me, how they'll accept or judge me, and nothing about me has changed! I've known it since the very beginning. Everything that was happening was my fault. I'm the lowest of the low. I absolutely hate myself.
Then we enter this C section. Oh, god damn it. Just... Are you... There has to be another word for this. Okay. So anyway, we enter the C part of the cycle. And it's just Rem countering everything Subaru says with things that she likes about him. She likes his pretty and masculine hands. Not even the only character who says this. Dude's got nice hands. But more importantly, where Subaru sees an inert failure incapable of saving anyone or accomplishing anything with his life, Rem sees her personal hero. I'll just let her do the talking, and pray that I don't get copyright down to hell.
Listen to me. I know that no matter how deeply you've fallen into the pit of darkness, you still have enough courage to reach out your hand. I love it when you run your hand along my hair. I feel as though we can understand each other without ever saying a word, just through that bit of contact. I love the sound of your voice. Just hearing you say a single word makes my heart flutter and feel warmer.
Skipping ahead a bit, the two continue.
I love you.
Why would you say that?
When you said that you hate yourself and told me all the reasons why you feel that way, it made me want to counter those reasons and tell you all the absolutely wonderful things I know and love about you.
You're just seeing what you want to see. Those things were all phony. That isn't me. I know myself better than anybody ever could.
That's not true. All you know is yourself. How much do you know about the Subaru that I see?
That's some Ava shit right there. Anyway, moving on swiftly and expeditiously.
No matter what painful things may happen, even when it looks like you'll go down in flames, when no one else in the entire world believes in you, when you don't even believe in yourself and you think that you can't go on, I will still believe in you.
A kiss, a shift in lighting, and a boob pillow transition us from the C part to the D section.
No one in the world believes in me. I'm no good. I hate myself.
No matter how you feel about yourself, I still love you. If you can't forgive yourself for being empty and having nothing, then let's start from here, right now, at this very moment.
Start what?
Just like when you started time for me after it had been stopped for so long. We'll make the time that you feel has somehow stopped for you begin to move again. Let's start over right here. From square one. No. We'll start from 0.
Hey, look at that. It's the name of the show. Isn't that something? Subaru responds to this unrestrained display of raw affection with
Rem.
What is it?
Emilia is the one I love.
In an event that can only be described as the cuckolding heard around the world. What Neuralities points out, that I think is worth reiterating, is the double standard between Subaru and Emilia versus Rem and Subaru. When Subaru pours his heart out, sometimes literally, for Emilia, and Emilia rejects him, it's seen as a temporary roadblock to the two hooking up like they're supposed to. Indeed, in Season 1, Episode 25, when Emilia and Subaru finally make up from their fight in Season 1, Episode 13, Subaru confesses to Emilia. Emilia says she doesn't love him back, so Subaru resolves that he'll just wait for her to fall in love with him. Rem can say the exact same things to Subaru that Subaru does to Emilia, but Subaru is under no obligation to like her.
He can just use her, again, as a curvy body pillow for his emotional needs, and then move on when he's back on his feet. And Rem is just sort of okay with it. No resentment, no complex feelings to work through, no arc about moving on. She just loves Subaru forever, unconditionally, and then she's erased from history. Told you it happens more often than you think. I'm sure you've noticed, again, that throughout the cycle, Subaru says a lot of negative things about himself. A lot of them are clearly untrue. Like, when Subaru says he's not really putting in an effort, all he's done since he's been summoned to this world is put in an effort for Emilia. As soon as he realized that he could return by death, he considers abandoning Emilia and choosing to live out his isekai paradise out in the woods. But he chooses to go help her. It's just literally not true. Subaru complains that he hasn't changed as a person since he got better. Rem doesn't respond by saying, actually, you're way cooler now than you were before, you just haven't realized it. No, Rem responds by saying, you've always been cool, I know it, so why don't you? Which should really, finally, put to rest this notion that ReZero is about Subaru improving as a person or something. We've been layering ideas one at a time here, but I think the final piece to the ReZero puzzle is this. ReZero has rigid and set defined gender roles for its male and female characters. It leads to lines like this from Season 2 Part 1. You know they kiss after that, yeah? Subaru, as the male isekai hero, saves. He suffers to save. He saves the day. He does all the hard work. He takes all the punches. But Subaru doesn't do it for free. He has a payment, and that payment is thighs. In other words, ReZero is a male wish fulfillment power fantasy. It's the same male wish fulfillment you'll find in any other isekai. ReZero covers it up a bit by subverting a bunch of less significant tropes here and there and making a big deal out of it. But I don't care about that. That's aesthetics. I care about structure, and structurally it's conformist. That's a borrowed observation, not from Neuralities, but from my editor, Raghava, whom I love. People will say, how can ReZero be a wish fulfillment power fantasy when Subaru suffers so much? Well, because that suffering has a purpose. It justifies him getting physical and romantic attention from women. Furthermore, the main mechanism of his suffering, return by death, makes him the most powerful and most important person in the story. Mo took a deep, long sigh. It was a lot to follow. All he could do was hope the goddess found his train of thought useful enough to free him, and that the audience found it clear enough to justify the constant death and rebirth through draft. I guess that's a lot of words to say. Between the pointlessly confusing writing, the convoluted lore, the way female characters are handled, and the only slightly veiled male power fantasy, I can't see ReZero as anything more than a particularly polished version of everything I don't like about isekai. The hero sat in the grass. I am so tired. Did using my power help you find the source of the rot in the isekai realm? The goddess hovered over him. Mo couldn't read her expression. It wasn't the open contempt he'd grown accustomed to, but unfortunately for him, it wasn't complete satisfaction either.
I started this by arguing that the problematic and derivative tropey isekai we've been getting lately are potentially bad copies of a problematic but less obviously poorly written success. But this thought is incomplete.
The glowing orb that contained every isekai in existence fluctuated in pulse as the goddess focused her attention on it.
This information doesn't give me a clear enough target to strike. There's one more isekai we need to look at.
Mo looked up with pained eyes. More?
Think about that exchange from ReZero Season 1 Episode 18, Bullshit Hero. Where else have you seen it?
The hero blinked. What on earth are you talking about?
You're not on Earth.
She shook her head.
That's besides the point. Just think.
She hovered closer to the hero, close enough for their noses to touch. The air grew cold and electric again.
A hero who finds himself defeated at the lowest point. A love interest without much of a personality or goals to think of, beyond loving the protagonist unconditionally, and considering herself in his greatest debt. lighting that shifts from dark to light, tension that resolves in the male hero resting his head on the woman's chest even.
I really can't think if you're that close to me.
Think about what Rem says.
Even when it looks like you'll go down in flames, when no one else in the entire world believes in you, when you don't even believe in yourself and you think that you can't go on, I will still believe in you.
Mo tried to back away. I told you I don't remember.
Then I will make you remember.
Sakuna jabbed her middle fingers into Mo's temples. Her signature gloves protected him from the worst of the energy transfer from her skin to his mind, but the pain was still incredible.
Mo Black, you must remember what you have resolved to forget and finish this essay once and for all.
As Mo screamed in agony, a single image flickered into his mind, a memory, pattern recognition, and then... I remember.
Now nobody can stop me, no way. Wastrete shimakoto no nayo ni nachita mo no spete dorimodo stame. Rise suddenly in this world.
I remember. I remember. I remember why I thought working on this project would be a good idea. It's been so long since I started, and I've written about so many different anime, I've gone through so much, and it's been so hard to finish that I almost lost sight of where I began, but no, it was this. It was always this. The Rising of the Shield Hero is a winter 2019 anime adapted from a web novel, a Naro book, of course, and a light novel series of the same name. It stars Naofumi Iwatani, a college student who gets isekai'd into a light novel as one of 4 legendary heroes. He's the titular shield hero, the others being the bow, the spear, and the sword hero. Much like ReZero, Naofumi at first expects to be greeted with a lot of the similar tropes you come to expect from an isekai world. He expects to be given an overpowered magic power that lets him become the hero of the land. He expects to meet a beautiful woman that will fall in love with him. He expects to go on a fun adventure and meet lots of new people along the way. Instead, he gets the weakest of the 4 weapons, or so we're told. The hot girl he meets falsely accuses him of rape, and goes gallivanting around with a pretty boy blonde guy. Since everyone thinks he's a rapist, he can't recruit party members, he's too weak to beat monsters on his own and grind, and he can't prepare himself for the wave of monsters he's supposed to fight. Faced with no other option, again, or so we're fucking told, Naofumi buys a child slave, Raftalia, who he abuses, until she fights monsters against her will. He has a magic slave crest that tortures this child slave if she disobeys him, that he uses and will kill her if she continues to disobey after being tortured. But see, Naofumi turns out to have been Raftalia's nicest slave master, because he does things like give her food and medicine. Since being fed is better than starving in a cage, she ends up falling in love with her abuser. Okay, Raftalia gets freed from bondage, but she has to go back to slavery, and now Fumi's like, you didn't have to, but at least now I know I can trust you. Also, they gave this child tits. She's the same age, she just looks like an adult now. She ages according to her in-game level and not how old she is, but she stops level aging after 25, so she's hot forever. At the start, Naofumi reads the book he's going to be isekai'd in, and he says the princess looks slutty, based on nothing. And then, at the end, he renames her bitch whore. That's her name from now on. Also, they give him a chance to pass any law he wants at the end, and he doesn't even end slavery. I laughed as I typed the script. The show is so good, it's so perfect in how bad it is. It's finger-licking good. When Shield Hero came out, it came under a lot of fire for being reprehensible and also bad. I mean, the false rape accusation, incel shit, the right-wing weirdos comparing feminists to the show's evil princess, the pedophilia, the bitch whore, justifying the actual institution of slavery to sell you a waifu. It was bound to generate controversy. I know, because I was there. I wrote the polemics. I wrote 2. They were fucking great. I'd write them again. And because of that, I don't feel the need to substantiate the claims I've made here. This is really just the bare bones amount of context you need for me to make my point. Shield Hero hates women for fun, and I've never met a well-adjusted Shield Hero fan. Even the people who started out defending it from SJWs ended up either dropping it or admitting they only watch it to spite leftists. Also, it has 3 seasons now. So why am I bringing up Shield Hero again, aside from the fact that this is very fun for me? Well, in episode 4, Naofumi is challenged to a duel.
to release his child slave, and he loses because the other side cheats. The story wants me to feel bad about this somehow, even though it's the objectively correct thing to do. Naofumi is at his lowest point. He feels persecuted by the world, unable to trust anyone, having all his favorite objects taken away from him, like Raphtalia. It's at this lowest point that Raphtalia arrives to comfort him.
Don't touch me!
Naofumi talks about all the reasons why he's selfish and doesn't deserve love or companionship. Sure, he doesn't understand why he's been dealt such a bad hand, but he believes deep down that he doesn't deserve anything. Raphtalia, hearing this, counters Naofumi, giving him all the reasons she sees him as her hero.
I hate it!
I'm thankful. This shield has saved my life over and over. Don't you remember during the wave? Even though you knew you couldn't fight, you still used your shield and your strength to defend us all.
To be honest, I didn't do any of that for the villagers.
But you must see that it doesn't matter, and you still saved all those lives.
And then Raphtalia says,
Master Naofumi, I bet I know you better than anyone else in this whole wide world.
You're just seeing what you want to see! Those things were all phony! That isn't me! I know myself better than anybody ever could!
That's not true! All you know is yourself! How much do you know about the Subaru that I see? So even if the whole world speaks ill of you, I'll tell them they're wrong. I'll defend you, and remind them of all you've done. When no one else in the entire world believes in you, when you don't even believe in yourself and you think that you can't go on, I will still believe in you.
Then it's a shift in lighting, and a boob pillow, and Naofumi's back on his feet, ready to take on the world once again. And by take on the world, presumably the story means get more female slaves. But this is the same scene as in ReZero Season 1 Episode 18. Look, I will always hate Shield Hero way, way more than I hate ReZero. I've talked a lot of shit about ReZero, but it will never rival the absolute black contempt I hold in my heart for Shield Hero. Which is why I've already resolved to watch every episode of Season 2. And that notwithstanding, when I say these scenes are the same, I mean they're structurally the same. It's the same meta archetypes enacting the same scene in very similar contexts to achieve the same effect. The actual characters are different. Rem isn't a slave, thankfully, but their roles are the same. Rem is a maid because thematically she serves Subaru. She's devoted to him and loves him. She defends him and cares for his emotional needs. Raphtalia is a slave because thematically and literally she serves Naofumi. She's devoted to him and loves him. She defends him and cares for his emotional needs. Both Naofumi and Subaru are wish fulfillment self-insert male protagonists. They both stand in for the audience member who believes they are not worthy of love. They both fulfill the fantasy of having a pretty girl who believes that deep down you're a wonderful and caring person. This girl loves you no matter what and will defend you from the outside world that's out to get you. And also there's this, which is terrible in many ways that need no explanation. I mentioned this as the reason why I decided to write this essay, because when I watched ReZero for the first time, by Season 1 Episode 18, I was pretty skeptical of the show, but still hopeful it could turn itself around and focus on what made me like episodes 4 through 11. And then this scene hit, and I got an intense sense of deja vu. What was it about isekai that made two unrelated properties have the same scene with the same characters? Yes, I remember now.
And so you were brought here,
said the goddess calmly. The goddess removed her fingers, throat vision ended, and Mo's regular eyesight came too.
I'm sure you recognize by now our fatal flaw.
The hero nodded. It was pointless to try and find which anime every isekai is a bad copy of, or which anime ruined isekai by existing. Genres develop collectively, not because of individuals. If Shield Hero and ReZero have similarities, it's because they're building off the same collective building blocks of tropes and culture, not because one copied the other.
Exactly.
Sakuna noted the concerned expression on Mo's face.
You're nervous.
We'd have to change the thesis of the... Mo paused. If he said any more, surely the forces of return by draft would penalize him.
You want to use your power to rewrite the narrative upon your death, but you don't know how.
Mo froze. Wait, I wasn't allowed to... How did you... She smiled.
It was more than obvious to me, bullshit hero. Come now, let's figure this out together.
Okay, sure. Sakuna took on a stern tone.
I think I can create a new draft for you, but it will be different from the others. It will be attached continuously to the end of the essay, as the culmination of everything we've explored together. This will be the one draft that everyone gets to see.
What do I have to do for this? Mo asked.
You don't have to do anything. I, meanwhile, have to do something a bit embarrassing.
Without warning, Sakuna wrapped her arms around Mo in a tight embrace.
What the fuck are you doing?
It's the only way I know how to sap your life force painlessly, okay? You'll be dead in a few seconds.
Quit being a big baby.
The world faded to black. This was the fifth time Mo Black opened his eyes for the first time. It took him a few moments to collect his thoughts. His eyelids still stuck together as he blinked. His back was sore beyond comprehension, and, above all, he was experiencing the worst headache he could remember at the time. Nonetheless, as he sat up and surveyed his surroundings, the overwhelming sense of deja vu was enough to make him even more nauseous than he already was. This isn't the first draft of this part of the essay, he said suddenly and to himself. It was the only explanation that made sense. How else could it all be so familiar? The cold and soft earth under a carpet of brilliant emerald green grass, the rolling hills that flowed down to a crystal clear lake, the tiny lakeside town, the only sign of buildings for miles in any direction, and its one road leading in and out of the village. Even the stillness of the air and the warmth of the bright white sun in the sky was all too similar to what had come before to go unnoticed. As his eyes blinked, a familiar voice called out to him.
Bullshit hero. Don't tell me my alternate future self was that rough on you. Aren't you ready to finish this?
More than ready. With a flick of her hands, glowing particles rose from the ground, giving the goddess control of Mo's narration. Chapter 8. Bullshit. Context, context, context.
As it turns out, Shield Hero, Konosuba, Mushoku Tensei, and ReZero were all written in the same year, 2012, and published on the same platform, Naro, by people who were either friends or knew of each other's work. It's a bit hard to tell when focusing on anime adaptations. You will get a few Easter eggs like this. That's a ReZero screenshot, by the way, not a Konosuba screenshot. But ReZero and Konosuba getting their anime adaptations in 2016, Shield Hero getting its in 2019, and Mushoku Tensei getting its adaptation in 2021 makes it seem like every few years studios decide to make an isekai that's similar to the isekai that have been coming out lately. The truth, however, is that a group of authors who were all in the same community produced collectively a pool of stories that share the same tropes. Anime production companies, in a staggered fashion, have been pulling from that homogeneous pool to fill seasonal time slots with. It would be if Hollywood decided that, say, Homestuck needed a movie in 2016, then Kill 6 Billion Demons, which started in Homestuck's community, got a movie in 2019, then Undertale, which was made by someone who worked on Homestuck, got a movie in 2021, and we're all left wondering why we noticed so many similarities. Of course there would be similarities. They were produced by people who knew each other for very similar audiences in the same time frame. With this new understanding, we can actually categorize isekai by the temporal context under which they were made. Below, I present rough dates. You may notice they overlap. From 1990 to 2005, we have, let's say, Generation 1. At this point, isekai isn't really a genre yet as we know it. Instead, we have stories that use the otherworld premise to follow a different fantasy genre. So Inuyasha, The 12 Kingdoms, Spirited Away, even something as catastrophically executed as Garzy's Wing counts here. 2002 to 2010, Generation 2. Isekai is beginning to be used to describe these kinds of stories. There's an interest in going to another world in a video game by now. Notable titles from this era include Sword Art Online, The Familiar Zero, and Log Horizon. A lot of isekai tropes we see today do come from all of the fanfiction that these stories inspired. 2010 to 2017, Generation 3. At this point in time, isekai has become a veritable industry, and the genre is filled with relatively campy stories that star powerful, morally just protagonists who are popular with attractive women. This era, which includes Shield Hero, No Game No Life, Konosuba, Mushoku Tensei, and ReZero, is filled with stories that desperately want to push back on that. These stories tend to feature protagonists that are not the best people. These stories like placing hardship between the protagonists and getting the girl/the awesome power. 2016 to 2021, present. Isekai is incredibly popular. It's a gold rush of sorts. Most of the web novels from Generation 3 have gotten manga adaptations, if not anime adaptations. Since the field is so saturated, writers use bizarre story premises and longer titles to bring attention to their work. This is where we got stories like, Didn't I Say to Make My Abilities Average in the Next Life? Cautious Hero, the hero is overpowered but overly cautious. So I'm a spider, so what? Buck Naked in Another World, and My Next Life is Villainous, All Roads Lead to Doom. Villainous is actually a little ahead of the curve, but it fits more with the present trend that took off around 2016 than the previous trend. The anime that people hold up now as subversive, like Shield Hero or ReZero, or that they hold up as that which established a modern genre, like Mushoku Tensei, were extraordinary in their own way by pushing back against stories like Sword Art Online. But they all usually share a fatal flaw. Sword Art Online's flaws don't come from it not being edgy enough. They don't come from not having enough rape. Believe me, there's plenty. They don't come from the characters being too nice. SAO struggled with the relationships between different characters. It struggled for a long time to de-emphasize its protagonist Kirito and allow its female characters to have relationships outside of him. Instead of fixing that, these new subversive stories kept that in place and made the problem much worse, and opted to overturn SAO's aesthetics and tone.
Now it was the goddess of Isekai herself who needed a breath.
Bullshit, Hero. My problem has become far more complicated than either of us have imagined. I apologize for bringing you here.
Moshrug. Nah, I mean, this was a pain in the ass, yeah, and I had to rewrite some parts countless times, but I don't regret doing this.
Then fulfill your final obligation to me, Bullshit Hero. Explain what is wrong with my realm. Tell me how to save Isekai.
Chapter 9. Conclusion. Why is Isekai so... the way it is? When I started this, I admit I thought I could get away with saying something like because patriarchy, or because profit, or because fascism like I normally do, and I'm not saying those aren't part of it, but analyzing genres, I mean really digging into the history and the dynamics of why our stories are the way they are, is hard. There's not one factor, and I feel rather stupid for believing that I could convincingly argue such a thing by shitting on a few anime that all came out in fall 2019. We can definitely trace the influence of capitalism on art, in this case isekai. The middle class in Japan collapsed after the post-war economic boom, meaning an industry as fragile as the anime industry had to rely on otaku, a constructed consumer group of needs, who have a ton of time and discretionary income to fill the gap. Most of these needs, as well as alienated older male workers, have little time to socialize, i.e. are incredibly horny and oftentimes sexist men, and pandering to those men makes more money than challenging their biases, so the most sexist isekai tend to have the most resources poured behind them. But capital didn't just shape the demographics for isekai, it shaped the studios themselves. There's studio pressure to make things that they know will sell.
And since male-focused power fantasies have sold in the past, studios will often turn stories that don't fit into that box into stories that do, or at least play with the same audience, as we saw in Volume 3. Another thing we should keep in mind is that isekai is popular. We tend to talk about isekai as if everyone is sick of the same old, but by the numbers, this is not true. Fantasy stories about girls with huge boobs that bounce around everywhere and call you master sell, actually. A lot of people are interested in that kind of thing, and a lot of writers are interested in writing those kinds of things. And it's really easy to take a light novel fueled by fetish alone and turn it into an 11-episode anime to sell merch. Finally, it's not that the industry is lazy. I hear this a lot. People often say that isekai is the way it is because everyone from writers to animators just refuse to put in the work to write something different. It is true that writing something different would require more thought, and God knows how much work is needed to make anime look spectacular. But this sort of thinking pins the blame on individuals, as if we got more creative people into anime studios the problem would be resolved. No, isekai is the way it is because of financial and social pressure. I'm sure it wasn't Little Haruto's dream to work on the anime adaptation of Reincarnated as a Spatula in the Kitchen of Ridiculously Buxom Elves Volume 713, but that's what he needs to do to get work, and he doesn't have the money or time or social connections to make his way cooler and more creative idea a reality. I personally think isekai as a genre is permafucked. Look, it's not all bad, because this generation of isekai clearly doesn't give a fuck. A lot of isekai stories use the isekai premise as essentially clickbait to tell an entirely different kind of story. My Next Life as a Villainess and I'm in Love with the Villainess, two entirely different stories, believe it or not, both use the isekai premise to just make proudly gay stories. I noted how much I enjoyed Dismatenal for its female-oriented approach. I have a soft spot for Princess Connect Redive, though after having played the game, the source material is a lot more tropey and chauvinistic than the anime adaptation ended up being. But alongside these good anime, we also have stories that dig into the same bullshit that I mentioned just now. Like Cautious Hero or a lot of the new stuff coming out, and unfortunately because of the way these things work, the bad stuff will always get more money and attention than the good stuff, because the good stuff is good by virtue of really challenging people. Capital has already made it easy to profit off the worst of male impulses, and that's not changing anytime soon. When I say isekai is permafucked, I don't mean we'll never see a good otherworld story again. I mean the thing we call isekai will probably never be good. In fact, defining isekai as any story where characters go to another world isn't even accurate. Take, say, Winter 2021's Wonder Egg Priority. The whole point of that story is that the 4 female protagonists go out and they fight personifications of childhood suicide and bullying in another world. But no one calls it an isekai because it doesn't orient itself to that audience or use any of the tropes. Isekai at this point means stories that the marketing department advertise to you as isekai because they know you've liked isekai in the past. Isekai, the word, will fall out of style long before the term expands to accommodate all stories that actually make good of the isekai premise. I actually think this is kind of promising. Stop focusing on isekai as a singular thing that has certain characteristics and start looking for good stories. Support good stories, make your own good stories. The culture that stories are written in maintain and shape the stories that are written, but it's a two-way street. Writers and artists maintain and shape the culture that they find themselves in.
You seriously want to end your long-awaited isekai essay with a mini lesson on Marxist-based and superstructure?
Sakana laughed, then put a hand on Mo's shoulder. The hero flinched as energy pulsed through his entire body. Actually, the hero replied, I'd hate myself if I didn't.
It's your choice.
With a snap of her fingers, Mo felt his entire existence fade away, fading and fading and fading until all that remained of the clear blue sky and the emerald grass was the faint sound of the goddess's voice.
Bullshit hero, we will meet again one day.
Mo woke up in front of his laptop. The final draft of Bullshit No Yuusha, suffering from capitalist alienation, I reincarnate to an anime crit essay, staring him in the face. He looked down at his nubby little Pikachu paws attached to chubby arms. The world, as it seemed, had returned to normal. Jesus fucking Christ, no more isekai. I need sleep. And then I need to watch something else. It's all just bullshit.